Let's start our discussion by putting water over you, and maybe if I may start while pouring water into your glasses, Mr. Hayward, Genel, right, is now a new company that you have acquired, and my question on Genel is, how is Iraq doing? Because you are with Genel now the biggest operator in North Iraq. And so the question is, where are there more glasses? Sorry?
Well, I think the answer to the question is,
yes, please.
Iraq is doing mixed. I was at, earlier this week, there was a big conference on Iraq in London. And there's no doubt that progress has been made in the south, and there are some very significant challenges still to overcome, particularly around infrastructure and security, but I would say also the whole way in which the oversight and management of the industry is conducted in the south of Iraq. In the north of Iraq, in Kurdistan, again, a lot of progress has been made. Of course, there is a major political issue still to be resolved, but I think over the course of the next year or two, that will inevitably be resolved as production capacity in the Kurdistan region builds from around 300,000 barrels a day today to 500,000 barrels a day over the next 18 months and 1 million barrels a day by 2015. One way or another, that oil is going to find its way to market. It's sort of an inevitability. What political resolution occurs to achieve it, we can all speculate on, but it will find its way to market. And I think the conversation earlier this week focused on how do you create the basis for significant new investment into infrastructure in the south of Iraq in particular, to bring what's an extraordinary resource to the global market. And I think that's very much a work you when you founded Valaris, and your first acquisition was Genel, one looks at it and says, well, why have you not picked something easier than that, right? Because, you go right into a disputed area. The question of Kurdish regional government with central government apparently is unresolved. So you're really looking for a challenge, are you? Well, I'm never the person to shirk a challenge, of course, but I think, the oil and gas industry is about asset quality. And there was an opportunity in the Kurdistan region to acquire extraordinary high-quality assets that would not normally be available to a small start-up E&P company. So Genel has material interests in 3 billion-barrel fields, which is quite unusual for a small E&P start-up that's only 6 months old. And it's something that I've sort of held to be true throughout my E&P career, which is sort of the whole of my career, really. If you want to be successful in the E&P space, material positions in material assets is where the value is created. And that's what this is about.
Any kind of outlook you would give on when the Kurdish regional government, central government come to terms?
Well, I think there are two endpoints. One is that there's an agreement between the Kurdistan region and Baghdad. It doesn't look like that's likely to occur anytime soon. The politics in Baghdad are probably worse today than they were 6 months ago. There's another endpoint, which is the Kurdistan regional government creates an agreement with Turkey, and there's a lot of movement and momentum in that process currently. There was a very significant conference in Erbil on the 21st of May when the Kurdistan energy minister, in the presence of the Turkish energy minister, talked about joint cooperation and the creation of major infrastructure linking Kurdistan to Turkey. And I think either one of these two end states are entirely possible, and the Kurdistan regional government has done a very good job of creating two options. They've got sort of option A, get the right deal with Baghdad, and option B is do it alone through Turkey. And it's difficult to call which one will ultimately come to pass, but at the moment you'd put your money probably more on the Turkish option than the Baghdad option, but let's see. It's politics, so we'll see.
Well, thank you very much. We come back to you with some questions from the audience later on. Now I'd like to turn to Khaled Al-Sumaiti from KOC. KOC being the upstream arm of KPC, and therefore basically the man who is sitting all the oil that's going out of Kuwait, producing, except from the shared fields, I think you're producing around 2.8, 2.9 million barrels a day. Question to you, do you need anything from anyone? I mean, you know, are you happy, or do you need IOCs? Do you need service companies? Okay. What is your direction?
Okay. We have water. This is a good thing.
Water is good, huh? That's why. Look on first things first, right?
Let me comment, first of all, from where I am coming, you know. In Kuwait Oil Company, that's just for the audience, we have limited IOC presence, you know. We have only one technical service agreement with Total, and we have recently an agreement with Shell based on risk and reward. So we are coming from an area where that we don't have production sharing agreement or concession or operating service agreement. This is one thing. What we need, I think, we need a lot, you know. When we build our strategy in 2020, we looked that we have a really tremendous challenge, you know, that the growth is huge to double our production from 2 million to 4 million. So it was very clear when we built the strategy that we spell it very clear that we need IOC to help us, because the risk is high, is there, to go in exploration and also to develop the unconventional reservoir. So to secure that and to reduce the risk, it's good to work with somebody that they have the know-how, the experience, the pool of expertise. So it was very clear in our strategy that we need the help of IOC to overcome the challenges. The difficulty in Kuwait that we have, according to our constitution, that we cannot do any deal with IOC unless it's go through to the parliament and agreement. And we tried this approach. It took us maybe 12 years to have an agreement. We work with BB, Tony, he knows, but we couldn't succeed in North Kuwait project. So we came with something in between that. There is no capital investment, there is no booking reserve, there is no control, full control with IOC, and came with this, we call it risk and reward. And few companies accepted that. And we finalized a deal with the Shell, and also we are thinking to continue with others. So a need is there. I looked to it, you know. An opportunity for IOC is there. And also I want to add that also we have to think about it as a responsibility. Yes, there is a need by the NOC, and there is opportunity for IOC, but also if you look to the future, the demand on energy is growing. And if we are not working together and feel the responsibility globally that we have to put our hand together to overcome the challenges, there will be a supply gap in the future. So a need is there.
Now, if you look back in the last couple of years, the risk in your country has been rising, yeah? And I'm talking particularly about the political risk. You are making all your experiences with democracy or semi-democracy, and you mentioned it took you a long time to bring certain things to fruition. So that tells you that obviously it's not that easy, right? Now, if I were sitting on the other side, being, let's say, in theory, an IOC, I would say, well, come on, let's do business, right? And you say, well, hold on, I have an election. And then after the election, you have to appoint a new minister, new management, and then comes a new election. So the question is then, is this risk, yeah, something that has put you backwards? Is this something where you had to give your partners more reward in return to stay put?
This is a good point, really, that even from our side as a lesson learned, and also for IOC, the political arena and understanding before getting in is very important. Yes, we accept the democracy, and this is that something good and something bad. But we cannot change our mind that we don't need a democracy now in Kuwait. No, that we have to accept what is happening, and we need some stability in the leadership. This is what we are advising our political, especially our minister, that we need stability in our business. As you mentioned, in the range 1.5 years, we have a new minister. This is affecting our business. We, as a technical people, it's clear for us the need for the IOC. But we cannot control the political. It is affecting us as an operator, as a KOC, and also, I think, affecting the IOC to come in Kuwait, you know. If they see this instability, I think it's increase the risk to get the IOC. And this is what we are facing, you know.
Okay. Now we come to Christoph Schlichter. He is Senior Vice President of Production in North Africa from RWE Dea. Mr. Schlichter, you are probably going through now a lot of daily newspaper reading and television shows, and every day it's different emotional setup, whether you look on Libya, on Egypt, on Algeria. How are you feeling?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I can't really complain. The Arab Spring started in January, February last year, and it lasted until now. So I have something like 18 months of spring, and spring is quite a favorable season. So I don't really complain. But on a bit more serious note, yes, of course, we are very close to what is happening in Libya, in Egypt, also in Algeria, where we are active. We have quite sizable organizations in Egypt with a number of expats as well that we have to take care for. We are with a small team back in Libya now under quite special security measures. But what I can say, and I've been traveling to these countries quite frequently over the last 6 months, it is on a good track as far as I can see. And you just also asked a question here to my other panelist colleague here, whether the political scene is really holding up things. I don't think it really is. Yes, something take a little bit longer. Libya certainly was on a pause for quite some while. In Egypt, for example, we didn't have a single day of production loss during all this period. We launched significant projects in Egypt as well, and yes, here and there, when it really comes to major decision making, you see a bit of a difficulty there. But all these countries recognize that this industry is so important for them. They recognize how important it is to have reliable partners. And I think I can say for RWE, we are one of them. So this is recognized, and they really do everything to make business possible. And yeah, as I said, I mean, for Egypt it certainly works. In Libya we want to really pick up from where we were in 2010. We went through an exploration campaign between 2003 until 2010. Quite successfully, we ended up just before the revolution with declaring commerciality on a number of fields and issuing feasibility reports for development. And then the revolution hit us, so we really would have liked to be further there, that is true. But we, as I said, we are back in Libya now, and in very good dialogue with NOC. Obviously, they had other priorities up to now, bringing up their production to pre-revolutionary levels. But I must say they have done that very well and very successfully, and I'm pretty sure they are pretty quickly then open for also new investments that we want to take into that country. So yes, it's busy times. It sometimes is worrying times as well, especially looking at security situation. We had 2 evacuations last year out of Egypt and out of Tripoli, and then those were really scary moments, I can say that. But we are very happy to be back in both countries, and we look really into what we think will be a bright future.
So are you expecting that new rulers, new regimes will renegotiate the terms of agreements? Because obviously it's always a power struggle, right? You have to show your people that you're successful, that you're better than the old regime. So the only way to do it is to change this balance between those that are investing and the host government.
I don't see that at all right now. I mean, in Egypt, as I said, I mean, we carried on with our production contracts, production sharing contracts in the Gulf of Suez, totally untouched. We also entered into significant developments that I mentioned, and this is all work based on existing contracts. In Egypt, we went through a major renegotiation for a joint venture that we have there with BP in 2010, brought that to a very favorable conclusion. And this is also a contract we base our current work on. So, so far, there has been no approach there that these things will be opened up. The same holds for Libya. We also there in 2010, together with declaring commerciality on our fields, we turned our old EPSA 3 into an EPSA 4 contract. This was, of course, at a phase where Libya was adjusting all contracts. This was quite tough and long negotiations, which I think we still brought to a conclusion that we certainly can live with as an investor. And I think the key to that always is, and this is my experience from working in these countries and dealing with contracts, the key is really you have to address the requirements openly between you and the NOC. You have to accept the NOC as a keeper of their national resources. You have to be prepared to go in there for the long run. I very much like the comment from the delegate from Kenya asking whether really it is a good idea to go in there to make up the share price and then leave again. This is certainly not our approach. And but even if we are a small company, we have demonstrated in Egypt we are in for the long run. We want to make success with the drill bit and then develop our discoveries and carry on with production. And this is appreciated by the NOCs. And based on this, and based on mutual trust, you get the right contract. So I think the NOCs, and as I said, I mean, I'm in constant dialogue with EGAS, EGPC, NOC in Libya, Sonatrach in Algeria. They really know their assets very well. They know what investments are needed, what technology are needed, and they know what kind of return is required from an investor that comes in. And on that basis, you can find good solutions.
Now, your workforce in North Africa, I mean, I hear from some of your friendly competitors that they suddenly realize after the revolution or Arab Spring that their own employees are coming to them and say, look, I want to have the same salary like the expats working in the country. Now, have you heard such kind of demands, or is this new to you?
It's not new to me because, as you mentioned initially, I'm reading the newspapers, I'm hearing what's going on in the countries. I'm aware of strikes in oil companies, both in Egypt and in Libya. I can say for our joint venture in Egypt, Suco, there wasn't a single day of strikes. Yes, there were salary increases, significant ones, but I guess they were justified also in light of inflation numbers that are there. And on that basis, it works. But we didn't have a single day of strikes. We didn't have any other industrial action. And also our Libyan workforce, I must say, I mean, they went really through terrible times where we have not always been able to stay in contact with them through the revolution. We had our office in Tripoli open every day throughout those difficult times. So there were a core team of our local employees showing up every day. We went through significant troubles to pay them their salaries because of also the EU and UN sanctions that made it really very difficult for us to keep in contact and provide them with their needs. But we managed to do this, and I think employees are paying that back, and they look at it the same way. They see us as a long-term employer for them, and this pays out. Okay, thank you so much. Ben Knowles, partner with Khaled and Co. Basically, he's the lawyer here, right? He's specialized on litigation, arbitration, and I think really what sticks out from your activities in the last years is you have developed quite some expertise on Yemen. Fantastic, very fascinating country, but also having a lot of issues there. Would you need a lawyer in Yemen right now, or maybe someone who is better protected with a gun?
Well, if you want to answer that question, you should probably ask my team of associates who are in Yemen at the moment. So I think the answer is yes. In fact, our biggest initiatives in the last year have been in Yemen, Iraq and Libya. So I think, so far as we see it, there certainly is a role for lawyers in some of these jurisdictions that are going through periods of quite significant change. You're probably going to ask me a bit about security situations and how that impacts on what's going on. Our perspective is that as long as there is a functioning government, the parties can work together to produce solutions that can provide effective security solutions for everybody to produce, to operate, for the lawyers to operate, and everybody else to function together. Where it gets difficult is when there is a vacuum, when the governments are not operating effectively, and I think that's when the real security issues start to arise, because failures in communication, inability to get things done start to create problems.
Okay. Now, what is the nature of the disputes, if I may ask? Is this something you can say in general, there are typical features of the disputes that you're dealing with?
I think I would pick up on a lot of the discussion that has gone on earlier this morning. The relationships and arrangements that everybody is talking about in this room are long-term arrangements. And they're arrangements that are put in place, whether it's JVs or PSAs or whatever it might be. The parties get together with the best will in the world to anticipate how an operation may continue over a period of 20 years. And frankly speaking, there are too many factors involved to cover every single opportunity and every single downside that might impact on a particular project. So what tends to happen from my side is we tend to get involved partway through projects where some of the strategic objectives of the partners involved have changed and there are strains in the system, and so we tend to get involved in trying to find a way to complete the project to the mutual benefit of both parties. So I think one of the things that I would say to IOCs and NOCs involved in these long-term arrangements is you need to work very, very hard to ensure that you protect your commercial relationships, even when things are very difficult. You have to be thinking about the long term. You have to have, whatever your contracts say, both parties have to have certain flexibility to deal with the long-term situation, because as we've seen in recent years, we've had great political change, we've had huge economic change, and a contract that is written 20, 25 years ago is unlikely to provide all of the answers to deal with situations along the way. That's great for the lawyers like me, but I think that from the commercial people, it's the quality of the relationship which can allow you to avoid the disputes or to resolve the disputes in a way that allows your project to succeed.
So you wouldn't recommend anyone to make a fixed price deal, because a fixed price deal may be a fair and reasonable price today, and tomorrow it's ridiculous for one of the parties, and then it's going to have a high risk to fall apart, right?
Well, particularly on the gas side, for example, price renegotiation clauses are something that are very common now, but even in contracts where there aren't renegotiation clauses, quite clearly, if the commercial pressures are too great, those relationships ultimately will either have to be renegotiated or they will break down, and that is simply the reality. Ideally, what you want to do is to put in place provisions in your contracts which allow you to come back to the table with without a loss of face and without a huge dislocation, in order to deal with some of the changes in the commercial realities behind the scenes.
Yeah. Jan Constanti is the head of M&A from Wintershall. Jan, shopping, huh? What is on your shopping list?
Well, maybe before I go to that question, I want to turn back to Libya for a second, because we are actually, although those are two German upstream integrated companies, we are in a fundamentally different situation. Before the change, we produced 110,000 barrels a day, operated 110,000 barrels a day in Libya. Well, now we're back to 78,000. We are debottlenecking the infrastructure by, just as we sit here, building a pipeline basically for JOCO and the NOC. So what I want to stress is that we learned a few fundamental things in that crisis, which was a crisis to be managed in terms of facilities, logistics, people. We've been in Libya without interruption since 1958, and I think the biggest differentiator that we felt we had was that we are the largest foreign employer of Libyan nationals in that industry in Libya. And when we evacuated about 300 expats and 150 from other companies in a very strenuous situation with Air Force cargo planes, well, all the responsibility rested on the shoulders of our Libyan colleagues. And there's second and third generation colleagues in Libya that work, where whole families work for our company since decades. And that was actually the reason why we think our facilities, as many other facilities too, didn't get damaged. There was actually an amazingly small amount of damage to facilities and disappearance of long lead items or any other materials. And the key was also to rest confident in having those hundreds of Libyan colleagues sitting in the oases and in the facilities with a non-armed policy. So we had a policy that there is no arms allowed on our fields and installations to just avoid any escalation and stay completely neutral and factual throughout the period. And I think it's not an IOC-NOC relationship, which is the reason for us to have managed to be back to nearly the pre-revolution production level. It's actually a relationship between people and human resources and contracts. If your relationship is screwed, you go back to the contract, right? So in a good world and a good relationship, you don't need to pull out the contract again. Yeah? And that is one of the learning that we had in Libya. And by the way, Argentina, we're there since 35 years through all sorts of ups and downs, and it was never a thought to leave. And again, our staff there is dominantly Argentinian, same in Russia. Well, now, shopping list. Yeah,
yeah, you mentioned Argentine, right? Now,
Argentina.
I heard there's some good assets available. So if it's such a good place to do business, then fantastic, isn't it? Opportunities are all over the place.
Well, look, I mean, we've been there more than 3 decades. We actually received, over the last few months, 2 or 3 new licenses. Yeah, at the same moment, unfortunately, other firms got expropriated. Yeah, so basically, it is a very volatile environment, and it is something that still doesn't make us kind of nervous in the sense that we wouldn't go for new licenses. So we have acquired those 3 new licenses, and well, the current situation may slow down, obviously, the speed with which the unconventional or potentially unconventional resources may be assessed and piloted. But even without that current economic framework, there is no comparable infrastructure in South America or Argentina in terms of developing unconventional resources. It's not like in the States where you have readily available all the people that know how to do it. They come in with 50 trucks and do your frack job. I mean, this is simply not yet there. So it would have taken, even under unchanged conditions, framework conditions, commercial conditions, it would have taken a few years, to be honest. Yeah? So we stick to that mantra that this will come eventually, and we've seen a lot of ups and downs, and well, we just sail through it and see what happens. Excellent.
So a lot of risk investment, one could say, Libya, Argentina, Russia. You like it hot, huh?
Well, actually, well, true that for the reputation of a blue chip subsidiary, a kind of BASF being our 100% shareholder, well, it's indeed an outstanding portfolio, and indeed, it shouldn't happen everywhere at the same time. Yeah. So, but there hasn't been a single day where we couldn't stick to our growth rates and increase our production. When I came to Wintershall in 2006, it was a 260,000 barrel per day company. Now it's a 400,000 barrel per day company. Tony mentioned you need some material positions. I think we really have a material position in Russia. That position obviously needs balance. That's why we have the Libyas and the Argentinas and want to expand in the Middle East. But I think in terms of relationship IOC, NOC, one of the advantages of, say, the large caps, yeah, or mid caps that are here is also that we can sail below the radar, and we're not partners that you offer the finger and off the arm goes. Yeah, we are partners that have the tenure to stay, have the funding to stay, and take the time and the decades actually that it requires.
Thank you, Jan. I would love to ask you more questions, but I want to be fair. half time for me, half time for you. So you have the opportunity to ask questions to our panelists. And if you have this desire, please raise your arm. Well, while you're thinking about a question, let me throw one at you. I see that the trend in the relationship between IOC and NOC is going that the bigger IOCs try to escape the political risk, yeah? And they are going for what I would describe more the technological risk, yeah? Whether it is now any kind of difficulties one may have in a deep water or in an Arctic shelf or pre-salt or whatever, right? So I would consider that to be a little bit of a trend, yeah? Now, is this something that is depriving us from opportunities? I'm asking this while I understand you are picking up the opportunities that are still there, which are not maybe so much technological but more political risk. But probably you are, same like with Wintershall and RWE, you're just a little bit too small, right, compared to the BPs and the Shells and the Chevrons and the Exxons. Or am I misreading the trend? Tony, you have much more insight having been on both sides.
Yeah, I do. I think you are misreading the trend. I think if you think about the role of the IOCs, the role of the IOCs has always been to do the difficult stuff, the stuff that other people can't do. That's been true forever. So when the industry was formed in its current configuration, with the rise of OPEC in the 70s, the IOCs were forced to look for oil in the difficult places rather than rely, as they had done for 30 or 40 years, on the easy oil. So what did they do? They went to the North Sea and they went to the North Slope of Alaska. And today's North Sea and North Slope of Alaska are the deep waters of Brazil, the deep waters of West Africa, the deep waters of the Arctic, the deep waters of East Africa. But my view has always been that's the role of the IOCs. That's what they do. They have the capability, the balance sheet. That's what their role is, and they can create truly material positions. Think about if you're an IOC, you need enormous positions to make a difference. At BP, you could find a billion-barrel oil field, and the share price moved, 2%. So you need truly material positions. The only place you can find those is in the new frontiers, and that will, I think, always be the role of the IOCs, opening up the new frontiers. And we see it today, and you see relationships established between IOCs and NOCs based on that premise.
But let's come back to your current life.
Yeah, well, so the opportunity here is that it's politically difficult, and it's look, I've been both sides of it, right? In Iraq, when BP looked at Iraq, it was clear the biggest opportunity was in the south. It may not have turned out quite how some of the IOCs thought, but the biggest opportunity was in the south. So the choice to go to the south for BP was easy. It's tens of billions of barrels. In Kurdistan, we're chasing billion-barrel fields. Now, more recently, one of the big IOCs has decided they want to play both bets, which is fine.
Right, that's about Exxon, right? Yes, please, Khaled.
Can add to that, that there are some small IOC, they have the know-how, the technology. But in our case, we are talking about a giant, super giant oil field that you need big resources, that the small IOC, they cannot handle it. That's why in our negotiation, we went for the top 5, BP, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Total. Those they can handle the size of the need, The other IOC that they have, but they don't have as I said, the resources, the manpower, the capital of the size of the giant IOCs.
Aren't service companies an alternative?
Service company, they are not operator. They can provide a service. But we are talking about the full chain.
Okay.
The IOC, they are the operator. They can fill the gap. But the service company, they can fill some of those, the supply chain.
Mr. Schlichter, RWE Dea, I understand RWE is now reconsidering its portfolio and is getting out of nuclear. Maybe they pour more money into oil, and then you can buy the big oil fields and you can become a real major, right? Or you think this is not so likely, huh?
Well, yes, I mean, what is true is that RWE is leaving nuclear. This was not our free decision, but imposed on us by politics, and of course created quite some waves through the corporation. That's true. But coming back to our business, and also coming back to your earlier question on where the challenges are and where the opportunities are, I would like to add a few facets to that, and this comes from the background of RWE. Looking at North Africa and the Middle East, I mean, North Africa certainly is just a backyard away from here. So it is our neighbors to Europe. We have a fastly growing population and economies in North Africa, and they are in desperate need for energy over the next decades to come. And so there's a story evolving there, despite all the political unrest that you see right now. But if really these countries were to be successful, and we believe they will be at the end, they will need more energy. And we can be a company that is not only going after oil and gas, we can add also technology in terms of electricity generation. We are, for example, part of party to Desert Tech Industrial Initiative, where we're also looking at all the North African countries. And I'm convinced in the long run this will come together, and whether we will then be benefiting from funds that are not going into nuclear but into our business, it would be fine for me, but this remains to be seen.
Very good. Jan, you had the...
I just have to add something to your comment and the top five. We are actually operating billion barrel fields in Libya, for example, the Asara field. So there are non-exclusive skills that medium-sized companies, if they have the right people, can execute and run very, very profitably for all partners involved. There's also niches that companies can apply. If you think about unconventionals, then actually a few companies that really unlocked it first were not at all in the league of R&D budget heavyweights. It was rather small people that, small people and small companies that kind of humbly developed the science behind it. In our case, it's, for example, the extended value chain with BASF and the EOR capacity, basically reservoir management fluids and hundreds of researchers, that a very unusual, admittedly very unusual situation for a large cap like our company to have this backup of 1.5 billion R&D euros per year and a few hundred chemists. But there, I think a generalization does not apply. There's things that our German colleagues can do extremely well in terms of drilling. There's things that we can do extremely well in terms of reservoir management and then EOR. So watch this space. Yeah.
Ben, a question to you about distrust. Right? What's the main reason for distrust or conflict between host governments, investors? Is it the changing price of oil, where everyone becomes greedy, or is it because political realities are changing, or maybe something else?
I think there are many causes of that distrust, but I think that there are also some things that can be done which will actually reduce it, which in a way I think are more interesting to look at. I think one of the big issues that we see is the transfer of understanding and commercial information and technological understanding between the IOC and the NOC operating in a difficult environment. Because if you have an IOC which is asking an NOC or a government to make decisions, and the governmental authorities or the NOC is not in a position to properly understand the sorts of decisions it's being asked to make, you then find yourself in a situation where you tend to get a stalemate, which will then often lead to a dispute because there simply isn't the level of understanding on both sides to allow an effective dialogue. So I think that in terms of some of these very long-term relationships, it is very important to make sure that those kind of training and educational and information transfer activities take place and are seen as not just a kind of a SOP or a part of the deal, but actually there is a real commercial advantage to both parties in making sure that happens effectively.
Okay. Well, sometimes it also helps when you have no opposition, right? Tony, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think most of these situations occur as a breakdown of trust between the two parties, and that's normally a consequence on the side of the national oil company of government because of a change in fiscal terms, and on the part of the national oil company with respect to the international investor, it's because the international investor has not fulfilled their commitments and obligations that they undertook with respect to work programs, etc. Most of the confrontations that occur in this industry are a consequence of the breakdown of trust because of a failure on one or other party.
Very good. Another opportunity for you, ladies and gentlemen. Any questions? I'm overwhelmed. Okay. No, it is exciting because it allows me to entertain and to keep on asking my personal questions. Tony, what is the difference for you in running a big show and a smaller shop? Because I can imagine it's maybe more fun what you're doing right now than having such a huge organization like BP before. But really, what's your take?
You probably took the words out of my mouth. You know, it's an enormous privilege to run
Is the microphone on?
Is it on? Oh, it is
now
now.
It's better, thank you.
It's an enormous privilege to run a company like BP, of course, but in a personal satisfaction sense, you don't get very close to the action. It's a fact. You know, you spend your life dealing with relationships, really, with government relationships, primarily. And in my new world, I actually get a chance to look at seismic lines, spend days with reservoir engineers, go to the field and do all sorts of fun things, which is, as a geologist by training, I really enjoy doing. So, you know, it's completely different. I wouldn't have swapped the BP experience at all, but I'm enjoying being sort of an entrepreneur and starting up a new company.
Very good. Khaled, are you on the way for the 4 million? Are you going to make it?
Yes, we are confident we're going to make it, you know.
When? I mean...
This is the question.
Okay.
In our strategy, when we build it, that we have to achieve 4 million by 2020, we put the assumption that we have to work with IOC. Because, as I said, the growth is huge. We're talking about offshore, onshore, double the production. Now, the when is the question, that if we continue the way we are doing it, I think there will be some slippage. But there is some indication, because in the strategy that we said in 2010, we have to reach 3 million, you know, and so far we achieved that, you know, with the help of the TSA, IOC, and with the service company. But when you go to the 4 million, there is unconventional is coming. And this is the risk, you know. So we cannot confident that we will meet the 4 million by 2020 with that condition, you know, that there is some risk is coming. As you say, that when you go to the heavy oil, when you go to EOR, there is some risk. And we have condensate gas, this is another risk. So it is a questionable, but we are doing all our best that we can achieve 4 million by 2020.
Now, we heard today Statoil, its transition from being focused on Norway to gone out and becoming more an international oil company and with tremendous interaction around the globe. Wouldn't that be something interesting?
In KBC, you know, under KBC we have a KOFPIC, which is a company which is investing in exploration outside Kuwait. Mm-hmm. So there is an arm, you know, but within Kuwait, the KOC is handling the inside, you know.
So no answer on that question, I guess?
No.
No problem, no problem. Christoph, what's your next market? Because I hear all the time that East Africa is so nice and beautiful. Actually it is, I have been there. But it's still fairly underdeveloped in many of the countries. You have a lot of exploration companies out there that are digging holes and trying the best, and then they're ready to sell off. Are you someone who is ready to pick up from those junior oil companies?
I mean, we are, of course, screening the market and look at opportunities, and East Africa is one of the areas that is under very close watch by us. I mean, what we currently are doing, we believe we can get the next step in production growth out of North Africa. There we have projects in development and being just on the brink of being developed. Then the next step, looking forward from that, should be coming from the Caspian region, where we made an entry in Turkmenistan, for example. We are just carrying out a seismic acquisition there. We have interest in Azerbaijan. And then for the following steps, so you can see we are really looking very far into the future to really sustain not just our current production, but continuous growth. Yes, East Africa is an area that is very interesting for us, but being a smaller player, we have to look very carefully. We can't stretch our resources too much. We want to do what we are doing, we want to do that right. And as my colleague from Wintershall was saying, we can do things right, but we cannot do it all over the place. So when the opportunity is there, when we think there's a technological fit with our skills, and we have the funds, yes, then this might be an opportunity for us.
Okay. Ben, the MENA region, is it still attractive for IOCs to go in there? Or would you think there is a time now this is going to cool off because the political risk is a little bit overwhelming?
I think the political risk is working its way through. If you look at Libya, we're all, of course, waiting for the elections in the next few weeks. There have been lots of positive developments about in preparation for the elections. I think the security situation has generally been much better this year than perhaps people had expected. So, I mean, there are going to be plenty of bumps in the road, but I think so long as these various jurisdictions can get some effective government in place that can stay in place for at least a year or two in each for each period of government, then I think that the situation will improve reasonably quickly.
So we're talking about years, if not decades, right?
Well, I was talking to somebody about 18 months ago, perhaps a year ago, on the Eurostar, somebody from Egypt, and I said to them, well, when do you think the situation will sort itself out? Are we talking a year or two? And she said, and she was from Egypt, and she said, well, she thought maybe 100 might be a better.
Yeah.
I hope that was a comment made in desperation rather than a sort of genuine analysis. But I think that, I mean, obviously things are happening at different speeds in different jurisdictions, but there is a lot of global political will to move things forward effectively in some of the jurisdictions that have seen the most dislocation, most disruption. Yemen, we've obviously talked about a bit. Libya, there's a huge amount of effort to try and stabilize things and help things to develop forward. So I think that we're going to see a much better and much more interesting situation for all investors in the next 12 to 18 months.
Well, dealing with the frustration in that part of the world is going to be a big challenge, right? And if I look on the politicians, even in Europe, in countries that are considered to have a very stable political environment, it's always the oil companies they turn to when they want to shoot the next pheasant. And although there are no more pheasants out there, and the margins are very slim, and still they always turn to the oil companies when they want to milk the next cow. So I think this is going to be very difficult because the desires are always big, and the oil companies are very quick to capture because they have made huge investments and they can't just run away.
I think one that's interesting to look at in that, the sort of counter to that discussion is Libya, where for those, for people who know the country and understand it, it's potentially quite a wealthy country. And it doesn't need to, the NTC have stated that they will recognise all, I think they said all legally entered into contracts or whatever. And there has been a lot of commitment to supporting the existing contracts. But I think that there is a large part of the sort of populace who actually understand that they do require the people who've been investing in Libya over the years to stay there because a much better standard of wealth is really in sight. It's a country that could really come on quickly. Now, there are other jurisdictions where the situation may be rather different, but I think that Libya is certainly one which is much more positive than people might realise.
Jan, final word from you. Russia.
Well, Russia for us is a key account, is a fundamental part of our portfolio. I think there were MOUs announced like a few months ago that this story continues. But obviously it isn't only Russia. Yeah, we have a very big ticket item in Norway where we're going to spend over the next 4 years like 2 to 4 billion euros in developing the 5 or 6 discoveries we had over the last few years. So this will be a substantial value balance to that volume position. Yeah, we talked about the volume-value dilemma this morning, and that if it's managed right, it works well. Well, themes for growth, as I said, Russia will remain, Norway will come, big time. Technology in terms of South America, Argentina, as I said. And we are looking to expand in the Middle East, so we will continue our strategy, and Russia will be a part of it, and we're going to grow in many other places. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, then Khaled,
It's a very important thing, you know.
The soup is gone, right? No more soup for you guys. Khaled,
Okay.
please.
We talk about a lot of political issues, you know, and I think most of you know that 80% of the remaining reserve is with the national oil company. And if those national companies are not stable politically, then I think there is a big issue, you know, in the future to meet the global demand, you know, on energy. So the question for you, how we can solve this issue?
Okay, well, I'm a professional consultant. We can talk
Political
about it
issues.
after lunch. I wish to thank our panelists, and I would like to invite you to thank them with me.